So you're going into municipalities, into towns and cities around the world, as I understand, to try to ensure that they are part of the debate, that they are receiving what they should be receiving as far as sustainability programs go, and the knowledge that they need to move forward.
That's why we are partnering with the Convention on Biological Diversity, but also an organization called ICLEI, which organizes municipalities around the world. And we as a scientific partner are now in the process of contributing the first assessment ever done on how urbanization is affecting biodiversity and ecosystems. And there are quite a few challenges we need to be aware of and identify, but on the other hand, there are so many opportunities that lies in cities and municipalities and individuals looking at biodiversity and ecosystem service as an asset to address some of the most severe challenges we have ahead, like climate change that would affect cities really hard with heat waves and increased risk of flooding. And there, ecosystems could be a low-cost, low-maintenance, low-carbon solution, which would be very attractive everywhere in the world, not to say the least in poor cities in the developing world. And then there are all these other components related to health and human well-being, and also building resilience for the future. So we're looking into all those aspects, how cities could take up this on their agenda and actually on the ground implement and make a difference. And I think here is the key to the sustainable development of the planet, that all the municipalities come together and start implementing a strategy to address the challenges and looking at the opportunities they have, particularly using the biodiversity and ecosystems as these low-cost, low-maintenance, low-carbon options for addressing some of the most challenging things we have in the future.
I mean, just going back to the basics, what are some of the biggest problems created by urbanization? I mean, let's talk about maybe specifically about Rio de Janeiro, where we are at the moment.
Well, there's some obvious that expansion of the urban area will consume land, and often that's prime agriculture land. So what is happening on a global scale is now that we will, up to 2050, we will see that the urban expansion will consume land approximately 3 times the size of France, and often on prime agricultural land. And of course that will have knock-on effects everywhere on the planet and be a threat to biodiversity and ecosystems in many, many places. So that's one thing that is important. Why CBD is really interested in understanding the urbanization process. The other thing is that right now 25% of the protected areas are on average 17 kilometers from a city. In 10 years it's going to be 15 kilometers. So what we see is that the growing cities are coming closer and closer to a very large proportion of the protected areas in the world. So there's a need for the municipalities to start to, how do we coexist with protected areas and avoid this slow degradation, and turn around and see these protected areas as an asset that actually generate multiple ecosystem services for the city. And here I think is the key for municipalities to start looking at, get away from the view that we have of cities just being sinks of resources extraction from everywhere else, to turn it around and see how could cities actually contribute to generate services and contribute to the rest of the planet. And it's possible.
Can you give me an example or two of how that might be possible?
It's possible. For example, the huge areas in cities you could restore, and that could be part of your climate change adaptation, that you actually plant trees, vegetation that will help give a cooling effect, help reduce the flow of water in the landscape. At the same time, we see lots of examples around the world on urban and peri-urban farming, where you actually start to produce some of the food needed in the city, in the close vicinity, or actually in the city. And I think that's also a development that will be much more sustainable, that you have this local production, and where citizens are much more involved themselves in the whole food production and not alienated and distant from it.
I mean, is there a general recognition around the world, from the big cities, Jakarta, Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, that they share common problems and are looking for common solutions?
I can see that, and what we hope is that this conference, where the nation and the delegates from other countries around the world come together, could actually decide on some enabling conditions that would unlock that will and desire and enthusiasm on the local level, and actually that the nations will support that. And we can see these networks all around in the climate change subjects in biodiversity and ecosystems, that cities are forming networks to share experiences, technology, and support each other. But I think that so far the nations and the countries and the governments haven't been out there to supporting it to the extent they should.
I think we all have examples of cities that don't have it right, but is there any city that springs to mind that you've come across which has implemented some of these sustainable policies, that is on the way to getting it right?
There are plenty of examples. Right here in Brazil, we have Curitiba, which worked very hard on all sectors of city development, but I think been particularly successful in bringing in the ecosystem as an integrated part of the urban development, and could show that it's not rocket science. We know how to plant trees, and to show that in the long run it's low cost, low maintenance, and low carbon, and it will deliver the effects you're asking for. You have Singapore, very much in the same, and now you can see in China new cities being building on that experience from, for example, Curitiba in Singapore, and that's also very encouraging.
No, my final question was going to be what you expect to get out of, what would you like to see out of Rio+20 and beyond Qatar and next year?
What I would hope is that actually the nation state would take a little bit of a step back, and in an attempt to unlock all that enthusiasm and creativity on the local level, and make sure that there is this global local connection. So, for example, the UN conventions, I think all of them should reach out to the local level and start working with the municipalities, because that's where action is happening, where implementation, and where people are engaged in these things. On the country level, it seems like we get stuck in historical trajectories, and it's really difficult to get out of them. So if the nation states are wise, they should, I think, take a little bit of a step back and allow this arena of global local interaction to grow.